My name is John. This is research project. This is final research proposal. Chapter 1. Identification problem. The Jose Antonio Galan Agricultural Technical Institute is the only educational institution in the municipality of Chamesa, department of Casanare, with a student population of 275 children and young people between 6 and 18 years, the latter especially those over 12 years. Our young people who had to go through very difficult times because of the violence that lasted for more than 20 years to hit this population. The main difficulty for learning English is precisely in the upper, ninth, 10 and 11 grades, since in their first years of school they did not receive specialized education in this area. Research line. Intercultural and inclusive education, taking into account that the population victim of violence is characterized and identified especially in the municipality of Chamasa. This line of research should allow to find the best way for these young people who were so long relegated from the educational advance with the rest of the country can be effectively included in the new perspectives of teaching the English language. Research question. What teaching strategies should be used by the language graduate to ensure that students of the higher grades of the Jose Antonio Galan Agricultural Technical Institute can acquire the sufficient basis of the English language to achieve the sufficient level required to enter higher education? The previous question can be addressed from a case study approach, since we can focus on understanding the dynamics that are presented in this particular case, which allows to collect a series of data, file questionnaires, interviews, and observation to then analyze them qualitatively and quantitatively so that by triangulating the information we can give an acquired answer to the question posed. The main excuse me, the main characteristics of the qualitative and quantitative approach that we can take for this case are that observation and specific voluntary evaluation of phenomena can be taken that the hypothetical degree of the supposition and the collective truth of the supposition and that degree of foundation can be established then that these assumptions can be reviewed through tests and detailed analysis of each of them and that can be evaluated and analyzed. Okay. Objectives. General objective. Establish the real consequences that were generated by the influence of violence in the educational process, especially in the English language area. Specific objectives. Identify the level of English language that students in the 10th and 11th grades have to establish the degree of out of datiness with respect to other educational institutions. Look for specific strategies for this case that allow improving the level of English of the student of the higher grades, stringent interpersonal relationship damaged by violence and public order. Develop a resilient culture in the student Galanista which allows him to overcome the adverse events that have affected him and achieve a truly inclusive education that overcomes the inequality generated by the actors of the conflict. If we take into account what Christine Jeffers says in her book where she proposes the teaching of a new language with a descriptive distance approach to study the language practice of bilingual families, she says that a diversified methodology, questionnaires, interviews followed by very young children being the acquisition of bilingual language dialogue family records, helps to identify the social, individual, and linguistic aspects of bilingualism and its effects, when the focus is on the creativity of linguistic combinations, of the inevitable inequality of linguistic repertoires within the same family. The children of children serves as a magnificent glass to enrich our understanding of language and communication. In addition to the above, bilingualism implemented from the preschool level facilitates the learning of other languages while developing the capacity for abstraction. Obviously affect the learning of the new language, since the fundamental basis for this learning should be given preferably from the preschool education, and unfortunately they were not implemented since the teachers were in charge of this area. They did not have enough training to develop a pedagogy come in this sense. And when it finally became possible for a language graduate to face the challenge of teaching a new language in a region that had little contact with the advanced and privilege that modern education can offer, she found some students with limited linguistic abilities of the new language. Chapter 2. Theoretic, Theoretical background. The difficulties generated by the violence in the country have affected almost all the fields of development, but perhaps one of the most affected is education, and if we take into account this research proposal with more reason, the difficulties are evident in terms of teaching of the English language to a population that at some point was the victim of violence. Of course, there is much that has been researched and analyzed on this topic, but specifically for this case, I must refer to what can be evidenced in the field. On the other hand, entities such as UN or UNESCO have made intervention with pedagogical programs that seek to promote an inclusive education, adaptable to the political and social reality of our country, but due to the large number of affected, it does not manage to overcome all the difficulties that arise in education, especially in the English language area, particularly for the municipality of Chamesa, where the only educational institute is the ITA Jose Antonio Galan. The different territorial entities have tried to guarantee security so that the teachers that are accredited can arrive, especially the language teacher who a long time was absent due to the factors mentioned above. Literature review. The article Child Population Victim of the Armed Conflict in Colombia, Dynamics of Subjectivation and Inclusion in a School Setting, presents a detailed radiography of the difficulties that arise in the middle of the student population victim of the armed conflict. It is derived from research on the adaptation and social identity of children displaced by political violence in an urban school setting. Specifically, the study presents aims to understand the social situation that a school community goes through when receiving a population victim of political violence, and analyze whether the educational response favors its inclusion based on a qualitative methodology. A secondary analysis of a database was conducted with 25 interviews of different school actors, teachers, managers, parents, and displaced and non-displaced children. And the content analysis technique was used with the support of Atlas. The software's the results were grouped into two families of codes entry into the school setting and linked to school life. The conclusions showed the difficulties and tension of the school to adapt to the new social logics and to favor an inclusive response. Sergio Torres Martinez, in his article The Vicissitudes of Teaching of Language in Colombia, with regard to his topic, concludes that in our country, linguistic policies have increased the pressure on teaching work in the field of language given the manifest impossibility of covering the heterogeneity of our population with coherent and structured action plans. To this is added the lack of governmental will to face social inequality, the endemic violence in a large part of the natural territory, and the forced displacement of the countryside to the cities. Paradigm of research. It is necessary to frame this study within an interpretative or qualitative paradigm, taking into account the social impact that can be generated in the middle of the population due to the antecedents of affectation that they have suffered. Therefore, the opinion of all the actors of the investigation must be given. A relationship must be waived that takes into account the social context of the participants and that allows the design of collective work methods based on the knowledge that the population has in addition to the situation that are documented. Research approach. The aim is to advance an investigation with a methodological approach that allows to approach the different points of view, experiences interpreting the social reality from a qualitative perspective that does not ignore the importance of the social context in which it intervenes. Type of study. For this research, it is intended to advance a type of descriptive study that is not limited merely to the collection of data but takes into account the social and cultural reality, its custom, situation, and attitudes of all the actors intervened. The population to be intervened is the educational community of the Agricultural Technical Institute Jose Antonio Galan as the only training center in the municipality of Chamesa in the department of Casanare, specifically to the students who are in the upper 9, 10 and 11 grades who have great difficulty in learning English because in their first years of study they did not have access to specialist education in this area, mainly due to the violence it was life a few years ago and that prevented specialized teachers from reaching the institution. All of the above has generated as a consequence that the language teacher that the institution has been faced with some teaching difficulties, especially in the higher grades, which make it necessary to look for the strategies that suppose the lack of adequate linguistic basis for the learning of the English language in the student of the superior grades of the educational institution Jose Antonio Galan. Human resource. Young people will help with the research, carrying out personal surveys to the educational population of the institution, students, parents, and teachers. Physical resource, computer, paper, photocopier, space, documents, tables, all to carry out the required surveys, besides video projector for socialization. Economic resource for the acquisition of stationery and payment of photocopies.